I know as kids we've all heard stories similar to this one. The urban myths about the old woman who on Halloween would put razor blades in the candy she gave out to the trick-or-treaters. Or maybe the one about how the government had plans to discourage smoking by making every 10,000th cigarette laced with arsenic, so you didn't know whether the one you'd taken from the pack would be your last. For a lot of people, this story, from my time at Target, will probably fall into the same category, and to be honest, I can understand why. It's quite possible that the people behind this whole mess were inspired by those stories, I guess. The first I heard about it was whilst working at Target as a sales assistant, which, in the Target I worked at, basically meant you could be put on any section. Unlike some who would just stay on food or clothes, we could be shifted around. Not that I minded so much. It meant that things didn't get boring. The best job, though, other than management, was the customer service desk. There you got to interact with customers at a much slower pace than working on the registers, and you basically evaluated and decided upon one complaint, refund or exchange request at a time. My best friend during my time at Target worked on this desk, and it was him who told me the story. Now I know that instantly this means that the tale has tones of a friend told me. But trust me, there were plenty of other people working there who would back up his story, at least in the main details. According to my friend, a woman came in one day furious and screaming that a shirt she had bought the previous week had made her son come out in blisters. When my friend pointed out that an allergic reaction was hardly the fault of the clothes, the woman almost went into orbit. She said that I didn't understand, he told me. She showed me photos on her phone of the kid. His back looked, well, it looked like it had melted, as if someone had thrown acid on him. The mother went on to say that this was a school shirt, that other mothers at the local school had bought their kids' stuff from here, and how 2 of them had mentioned similar problems. In the end, security had to remove her while she was still screeching and wailing about her son being scarred for life and needing skin grafts. At first, my friend thought she was just nuts, but over the next week, 9 more parents came in to complain of their children having had similar reactions, many of them with photos. As soon as the fabric touched the skin, the flesh began to pop and boil. My friend was all set to report this, when another worker on the customer service tried to persuade him not to. Thing is, this other worker said, if you just fill in the form, they'll pay you. When my friend asked what he was talking about, this other guy explained that every month or 2, he was given a form by a man from a company called Zem Chemicals. The idea was that each month the company would secretly test one of its chemicals in the products distributed in Target and monitor the results. Sometimes it was dyes in clothing, sometimes chemicals in the shampoo or the soap products. All I do at the end of the month is fill in the form saying how many of a certain product have been sold and how many were returned. If a lot have been returned, like with this blistering thing, then I write out exactly what the problem was with the product and how it affected people. We had one a few weeks back with a shower gel that was making people's eyes burn and almost blinded 2 guys. There was one months ago that they put into a paint that made people pass out when they were in contact with it, because the fumes closed their airways. There's some nasty side effects sometimes, never mind what the chemicals might do long term. My friend was outraged. This was human trials, testing products and potentially harmful chemicals on the public without their knowledge or consent. He was appalled, but also curious. How much do they pay you to keep quiet about this? He asked. The answer was, a lot. Now I'm not saying that in every store up and down the country, there is a chance that the products are laced with untested and unapproved chemicals that can make hair fall out, give people asthma attacks, or increase the chance of skin blisters. I'm also not saying that companies pay people in every store to help them do this totally illegal and potentially dangerous testing on humans. As far as I know, it was this one store and this one guy. I'm also not saying that this testing does not extend to the food products, or that people have not been exposed to pollutants, poisons, and horrible allergies without their knowledge. Also, the company can figure out what works and what doesn't without having to go through official channels. I'm certainly not linking this story to any of the stories of widespread outbreaks of bacterial infections, food contamination, allergic reactions, or even fatalities and poisonings in small communities up and down the country. All that could be a complete and total coincidence. I'm just telling you what I was told. It's probably just an urban myth. When you work at a place like Target in the same town for a few years, you get to know some of the characters that visit. Even though the place is huge and the volume of customers probably the same as a small bus terminal or train station, you can't help but catch a glimpse of the same faces if they come in each day or a few times a week. especially if they make an impression. Flo was one of those characters, standing around 4 feet tall, with unwashed hair that had matted itself into something resembling a single dreadlock. Flo would come in every day in this huge, thick brown jacket that extended down to her knees, and which she had wrapped around herself no matter what the weather. With her tiny pebble eyes and leathery-looking skin, she resembled a sort of horror movie version of Yoda, but she was always pleasant, until she wasn't. Flo would come to the Target store every day and always bought the same things: a few small pieces of fruit, like an apple or a few pears, and several tins of cat food. A shopping trip that could have been completed in a few minutes lasted several hours, because Flo would take her time wandering around the store, chatting to members of staff and asking questions. Basically, we all reasoned that she was lonely, and that she came to the store more for conversation and company than because she actually needed anything. I remember one of my colleagues joking once that she probably didn't even have a cat. We all made an effort when we saw her to engage her conversation, and to some extent she just became part of the furniture. That was, until Douglas started at the store. Douglas, or Dougie, as he wanted us to call him, took up the job on security. Essentially, he was the store policeman and would stand on the entrance, checking the bags of anyone that beeped when they went through the detection equipment, which, in one particular day, happened to be Flo. Had it been any other member of staff, she would have been simply waved through. We all knew she wasn't stealing, and if she was, it was likely an honest mistake that amounted to a single tin of cat food, or 2 apples that she would pay for the following day. Dougie did not see it that way. When the detector beeped to say that she had left the store without paying for one of the things in her small bag, he called to her, but being in her 80s and partially deaf, Flo just continued walking. Dougie pursued her, and when she didn't stop, he grabbed her by the shoulder, bowling her over so that she tumbled heavily down and slammed her face into the floor. The melee that followed was awful. An ambulance was called, but Flo refused to get into it. She produced a receipt for every item she had taken that day, but in the process of getting to her feet and feeling that she had been attacked, sank her teeth into Dougie's arm. The result was a ban from the store dished out by an embarrassed Dougie to an injured and distraught Flo. We all knew it was the wrong decision, but few of us guessed just how wrong. When Flo turned up the following day, her face was a mess, a splatter of dried blood and swollen purple bruising. Still, she came to the entrance and without even acknowledging Dougie, tried to enter the store. Dougie stopped her, repeating that she was banned from the store, and she burst into tears. Eventually she left, but she returned the following day. Rather than attempting to enter the store, however, she simply came to the entrance and from her bag produced a small glass jar, like something you would put jam in. Instead of jam, however, the jar contained what appeared to be a single rotten tooth. This tooth, it later turned out, was her own. Something we figured out when she spoke, and showed that one of her 2 front teeth was missing. Whether this rotted tooth had been knocked out during her fall, or, as Dougie had insisted, she had pulled it out herself, was not clear. It sat in the jar in a sort of orange-brown liquid with what looked like sprigs of herbs around it, as if she had made some kind of weird tea from it. Though it sounds ridiculous, Dougie's theory that she removed it herself may well have had some validity, because Flo went away at lunchtime, only to return an hour later, by which time her mouth was bleeding, the jar had 4 more teeth in it, and her smile looked suddenly a lot less crowded. Rather than coming into the store at all that day, Flo simply stood in the doorway holding it and grinning. It was an awful, humorless smile that showed for all to see the new gaps in her teeth. Though she smiled, she also stared, long, hard, and with a horrible, spiteful rage toward Dougie. Flo arrived, as she usually did, around 7:30 a.m. She left around 5. Every half hour she would ask him, "Can I come in?" And when he shook his head, would move her horrible jar a little closer to the door. What's weird about that time period, and what I swear is true, is that on that particular day, in the weirdest of coincidences, our branch of Target had the largest spike in waste products it has ever experienced before or since. Overnight, virtually every piece of fruit that had been brought in on the previous day's delivery went rotten, blackened and putrefied and covered in mold, as if it had been sitting there for months rather than the few hours that it actually had. The meat too, pre-packaged chickens, steaks and cuts of lamb, all had to be thrown because they were rotten. Some of them turned a nasty shade of green, and still others were found crawling with maggots. There was never an explanation. Some said it was a refrigeration problem with the delivery truck, others that some kind of contaminant or bacteria had gotten into the produce at the stock depot. Neither explanation really answered the question of how almost a ton of stock could go completely rotten overnight. nor did it explain what happened to Dougie. I never saw him again, but from what I was told, he fell seriously ill and was in hospital for almost 3 months with a variety of problems, most of which stemmed from some kind of undiagnosed illness that was described to me as a wasting disorder in his muscles. It was if, one of my colleagues said, he rotted from the inside out. With Dougie gone, the decision to ban Flo was quickly overturned, and she came back to her usual quiet wanderings and gentle conversations with the staff, all of whom were not only glad to have her back, but now strangely careful to make sure they didn't make her mad. After all, you could see when she smiled that she had a few teeth left,